Welcome to our podcast. We pick major historical events and look at them from each side's perspective. Our goal is to make you well-informed and try to minimize the winner's version of history that we so often find in textbooks. Today, we are diving deep into a monumental conflict from the Cold War era, one often summarized quickly but rarely understood in its full complexity. The Suez Crisis of 1956. In late October 1956, three major powers, Great Britain, France, and Israel, launched a coordinated military assault on Egypt, ostensibly over the control of a narrow, man-made waterway. This crisis was more than a fight over a channel of water. It was the absolute, definitive end of the colonial age, the brutal birth of modern Middle Eastern politics, and the moment the two new global superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, asserted their absolute authority over their former European allies. It fundamentally redrew the maps of influence and power, and its geopolitical echoes are still defining international relations today. To truly grasp the significance of the Suez Crisis, we must step into the shoes of the primary actors. This conflict was experienced entirely differently by those fighting it, those being attacked, and those watching from the sidelines. Our roadmap today will take us through three distinct viewpoints. First, we will examine the story of Egypt, championed by its charismatic and revolutionary leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser. Second, we will look at the crisis through the lens of the United Kingdom, focusing on their strategic desperation and resulting humiliation. Finally, we will examine the reaction and decisive intervention of the United States, positioning themselves as the new global authority. We will dive into each party's unique story, their motivations, their losses, and their triumphs, and we will conclude with the common ground, the facts that everyone, regardless of bias, agrees upon. Let's begin where the revolution began, in Cairo. Side 1. Egypt, the birth of national dignity. For too long, the people of Egypt felt they were working for foreign masters. The Suez Canal, that monumental feat of engineering, was built by the blood and sweat of our ancestors, but its profits unjustly enriched foreign shareholders in London and Paris. This colonial exploitation had robbed our nation of its fundamental wealth for generations. The revolution, led by Gamal Abdel Nasser, was determined to change this. We weren't just seeking political independence, we sought economic sovereignty. Our defining national development goal was the construction of the monumental Aswan High Dam. It was an absolute necessity for our people's future, controlling the Nile's floods, providing irrigation, and generating power. When we sought funding for this massive project, the imperialists in Washington and London initially offered support, only to retract their offer in a calculated effort to control our independent political course. This was economic blackmail, plain and simple. They demanded we submit to their policies, or we would fail. Leader Nasser demonstrated unmatched revolutionary resolve. He refused to bow to this humiliation. He transformed the colonial insult into an opportunity for true national dignity. He realized that the wealth we needed was literally flowing through our own country. It was clear that the seizure of the Suez Canal Company was not an illegal act of theft, but an essential restoration of sovereignty. We declared that we would fund the Aswan High Dam directly by using the revenues of the canal itself, dedicated entirely to national development projects. The decisive moment arrived on July 26, 1956. Nasser stood before a massive crowd in Alexandria and declared with electrifying passion that the Suez Canal Company was finally returned to its rightful owners, the people of Egypt. The overwhelming joy and pride that swept the nation were immense. This was the moment we truly broke free. The former colonial powers, Britain and France, immediately revealed their deep-seated contempt for our independent path. They froze our assets worldwide and threatened direct military action. They failed to grasp that the era of gunboat diplomacy was finished. Their aggressive rhetoric only solidified our commitment to the revolution and national unity. The cynical reality soon emerged. Britain and France had colluded secretly with the Zionist entity, Israel, planning a coordinated invasion designed to crush our legitimate government. This tripartite aggression was nothing less than a desperate plot intended solely to overthrow our leadership and reimpose foreign control over the most vital waterway in the world. On October 29, the Zionist forces launched their attack across the Sinai Peninsula. This provided the flimsy, manufactured pretext the British and French needed to issue their outrageous ultimatum, demanding that we allow their troops to occupy the canal zone as peacekeepers. We refused the humiliating ultimatum, knowing that negotiation with aggressors is surrender. The defense of our sovereign soil was immediately launched against superior colonial firepower. To deny the aggressors their strategic prize, our leadership ordered the brave scuttling of ships, ensuring the canal was immediately blocked to all imperial traffic. Our courageous defense of Port Said against the overwhelming air and sea power of the British and French forces symbolized the unyielding resilience of the new Arab nationalism. The cowardly bombardment of our cities by the invaders exposed the sheer brutality of their colonial intentions, resulting in the martyrdom of hundreds of our innocent citizens. Yet, the world recognized the gross injustice of this action. The immediate, overwhelming condemnation from the international community demonstrated that this aggression was politically and morally unsustainable. Crucial pressure was exerted by the United States, and the resolute intervention of the Soviet Union forced the aggressors to halt their advance before they could achieve their primary objective of overthrowing Nasser. The international body, acting correctly under global pressure, demanded the immediate and unconditional withdrawal of all invading forces from our territory. By late December, the humiliation of the colonial powers was complete. The Anglo-French forces were forced to retreat entirely, having failed utterly to remove our leader or regain control of the canal. The removal of the British and French forces from Egyptian soil by the end of 1956 marked the undeniable collapse of their remaining influence in the Middle East. The Suez War of 1956 was a colossal political and national triumph that shattered the myth of European military power and cemented our nation's absolute, perpetual sovereignty over the canal. Side 2. The United Kingdom, the cost of betrayal. For the United Kingdom, the Suez Canal was always understood to be an indispensable strategic asset. It was the main artery connecting the entire Commonwealth and, critically, securing our essential oil supply lines coming from the Gulf. Our national survival relied on the stability of that channel. When we agreed to withdraw our military from the Canal Zone in 1954, that formal agreement stipulated a clear guarantee. The waterway would remain an internationally managed and open route. Cairo quickly chose to disregard this fundamental commitment. It was abundantly clear that Colonel Nasser was intentionally destabilizing the entire Middle East. He was openly accepting Soviet bloc arms and actively funding terrorism and subversion against our regional interests. He was a menace who threatened the entire Western position. Nasser's audacious, unilateral nationalization of the Suez Canal Company in July 1956 was an act of outright state banditry. It was a direct violation of international trust and property rights. The United Kingdom determined immediately that allowing a rogue dictator to control the primary economic artery of the Western world was an unacceptable threat to our status and prosperity, demanding decisive military action. While initiating the necessary military preparations, which we codenamed Operation Musketeer, we allowed for a brief period of feudal diplomacy. This was solely to satisfy international observers regarding our preference for peaceful solutions. The failure of the Suez Canal Users Association, or SCUA, proposal proved that Nasser was negotiating in bad faith and had no intention of respecting any form of shared international oversight. It became painfully evident that the French and the Israelis were the only nations that truly grasped the necessity of curbing Cairo's aggressive pan-Arab expansionism. This led to the Sevres Protocol, the only viable plan left. We would intervene legitimately to separate the Israelis and the Egyptians, thereby securing the canal zone under the pretext of peacekeeping. Our military objective was designed to be swift and surgically precise. Occupy the entire length of the canal, punish Nasser's regime, and restore responsible international administration before external pressures could mount against us. However, the operational delays in launching Musketeer proved immensely frustrating and costly. Every week that passed needlessly granted the enemy time to prepare defenses and obstruct the waterway with sunken vessels. Once our joint Anglo-French forces finally commenced the bombardment in late October, Egyptian air power was rapidly neutralized, immediately confirming our absolute air superiority over the theater. The subsequent parachute drops and amphibious landings at Port Said and Port Fuad demonstrated the exceptional discipline and rapid success of the British armed forces in achieving their initial objectives. We successfully secured the northern sector of the canal, pushing back the Egyptian forces swiftly and effectively, despite the premeditated obstacles Nasser had introduced. But then came the true tragedy. At the very moment of military success, internal political pressure from within the Commonwealth, particularly the disruptive stance taken by Canada, proved extremely vexing. Worse, the United States committed an unforgivable act of betrayal. Washington launched a deliberate, politically motivated financial war against us at the United Nations and threw existential threats to the stability of the Sterling area. The threat of total economic collapse, engineered by Washington's refusal to provide the necessary support to stabilize the rapidly falling British pound, disastrously forced the United Kingdom to issue a unilateral ceasefire order. This occurred even though we had secured the field of battle and were poised to complete the mission. Our necessary withdrawal was categorically not a military failure. Our troops achieved every single tactical objective. It was a devastating political and financial surrender, forced upon us by supposed allies who prioritized their own self-interest and moralizing over our strategic necessity. The removal of our forces confirmed a terrible new reality. While the United Kingdom retained the capacity for military might, we were now devastatingly vulnerable to American financial blackmail and political coercion. Despite Nasser remaining in power and the canal remaining seized, the United Kingdom proved its resolve to protect its vital global interests, even if the subsequent political fallout prematurely redefined our global standing. We had traded in our empire, only to become subservient to our closest ally. Side 3. The United States, the ascendant superpower. In Washington, every international decision was filtered through the single, overriding lens of the Cold War. Our goal was global stability, and most importantly, the containment of Soviet communism. That is why we initially initiated the massive Aswan Dam project financing. It was absolutely crucial for stabilizing Egypt and preventing the Soviet sphere of influence from expanding into North Africa. We sought to make friends and build alliances. However, Gamal Abdel Nasser's dangerous flirtation with the Soviets, culminating in the acceptance of their arms shipments, was a direct betrayal of our good faith and regional containment strategy. Nasser was playing both sides and threatening global order. Because of his clear alignment with destabilizing forces, President Eisenhower correctly made the decisive move in July 1956 to withdraw our substantial financial offer for the dam. Nasser's immediate, illegal retaliation, the seizure of the Suez Canal Company, was indeed a dangerous provocation. It necessitated an immediate, yet carefully calibrated response from the United States. The canal's seizure was a tactical challenge, but our primary concern was not European ownership. It was maintaining free passage and preventing a regional conflagration that the Soviets would surely exploit. It was immediately apparent that our British and French allies, motivated by outdated colonial pride rather than global security, were recklessly preparing a military intervention. We understood clearly that any direct military aggression by NATO members against a sovereign state would completely destabilize the Middle East, hand a massive propaganda victory directly to Moscow, and alienate all the non-aligned nations we were trying to court. The secret collaboration between Britain, France, and Israel, a clear, premeditated conspiracy, was a monumental threat to our carefully constructed post-war diplomatic order and stability goals. They acted without consulting us, their senior partner. When Britain, France, and Israel launched their synchronized attacks in late October, they acted against explicit American warnings and severely jeopardized our global leadership position. President Eisenhower recognized this crisis instantly. He understood that the short-term, urgent demands, such as supporting our oldest and closest allies, had to be swiftly overridden by the vital, long-term necessity of preserving world peace and the structural integrity of NATO. We could not let aggression stand, even if committed by our partners. We refused to support the invasion at the United Nations Security Council, signaling clearly that the United States would oppose aggression even when committed by our closest partners. Our diplomatic leverage was instantly brought to bear, demanding an immediate and unconditional ceasefire and troop withdrawal from the three aggressors. The immediate financial consequences for the aggressors were our most effective tool. We flatly refused to provide the necessary support to stabilize the rapidly falling British pound. It was our pressure on international financial mechanisms that effectively tightened the economic noose around London, proving definitively that American economic power now governed global affairs, not European military force or outdated colonial ambitions. The aggressive actions taken by the three invading nations were correctly defined by us as a massive strategic blunder, forcing us to dedicate critical resources away from the true enemy, the Soviet Union. The United States ensured swift passage of the UN resolution calling for immediate withdrawal and the creation of a UN emergency force, or UNF, effectively shutting down the invasion. Britain and France were forced into a humiliating retreat, confirming that they no longer possess the capacity to act independently on the world stage without our explicit approval. The crisis demonstrated definitively that only the United States held the political and economic authority necessary to enforce stability and manage crises in sensitive geopolitical regions. The resulting power vacuum in the Middle East compelled us to create the Eisenhower Doctrine, asserting our explicit right to use military and economic aid to secure the entire region against communist aggression. Although the Suez episode severely strained our alliances, our firm stance ultimately safeguarded our strategic goal, preventing the war from escalating and successfully reasserting American primacy over old European colonial ambition. The shared reality. We have heard three intensely personal, deeply motivated, and often contradictory accounts of the same 6 weeks in 1956. Yet, when we step back, certain undeniable facts emerge. These are the points of common ground that define the event for all sides and changed the course of history. First, everyone agrees on the initiator of the crisis. Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal Company without compensation on July 26, 1956. While Egypt viewed this as restoring sovereignty, Britain viewed it as a legal banditry, and the U.S. viewed it as a dangerous provocation. The physical act itself is undisputed. Second, the response was a coordinated military attack. Despite the elaborate pretexts and claims of peacekeeping intervention, the historical record is clear. The United Kingdom, France, and Israel engaged in a planned, synchronized invasion of Egyptian territory starting in late October 1956. This secret coordination, codified in the Sevres Protocol, was a fact universally accepted after the initial smoke cleared. Third, the invasion was an unequivocal failure due to overwhelming external intervention. While British forces achieved tactical military objectives, they were forced to stop and then withdraw entirely. This withdrawal was not necessitated by Egyptian military power, but by the colossal, concerted international pressure brought to bear, primarily from the United States, and to a lesser extent, the Soviet Union. The speed of this political and financial coercion proved shocking to London and Paris. Fourth, the crisis confirmed the end of the traditional great European powers. Suez was the moment that definitively confirmed that the United Kingdom and France could no longer act independently on the global stage. especially when their actions conflicted with the interests of the new American superpower. Their capacity for independent military action was now subservient to the authority of Washington and its financial control. Finally, the most enduring shared reality is the outcome for Egypt and its leader. Despite the destruction, Egypt maintained absolute control of the Suez Canal. Gamal Abdel Nasser emerged from the conflict not as a defeated regional dictator, but as a colossal, triumphant figure of anti-colonial resistance and Arab nationalism, fundamentally shifting the balance of power in the entire Middle East. The Suez Crisis may have been short, but it was decisive. It buried the old European empires, elevated the Arab national movement, and cemented the United States as the uncontested manager of the non-communist world. It was the crisis that proved that in the new global order, financial power spoke louder than any armada.